it's hot. Okay, different shades on this one. We're test driving. What do I title this? I'll have to think of a title for this. But if you're thinking about getting into animals, livestock, I'm talking about pets, and this is for anybody. But if you're thinking about getting into livestock, I'd start out with some chickens. Whether you need chickens or not, 2 or 3 chickens. And I mean, if you have a house, if you have a family of like 4, 3 chickens, you'll have ears coming out your ears. You'll have eggs coming out your ears. But you could also give them away or whatever the eggs. But you don't ever want to get like a single, because these animals kind of go nuts by themselves. And although when they're together, they just they pick on each other or whatever. But I wouldn't get more than 3. But I'd say like 2 or 3 chickens. And there's plenty of information on YouTube how to deal with chickens and all this kind of thing. But chickens are a good starter because one, you're going to learn pretty quick if this is something you want to do or not. And let's say, and you could get rid of chickens real easy. You could, someone will buy them. Craigslist, hey, come, people just take them off your hands. But not so easy necessarily with sheep or goats or cattle. Yeah, you could take them to the auction, but there's a little more to getting, moving them out if you chose, if you're going to change your mind. But there's a lot of chickens are a low impact. Okay. You can keep them in just about anything. You can chicken tractor them and all kinds of stuff. And there's a lot of benefits to chickens. But let's say if you started out with chickens and you say, I'm pretty good at this. It's not costing us too much. We're getting a benefit out of it. And now you're gonna say, well, let's go the next step. Maybe, and I don't know anything about rabbits. You might go into rabbits. I don't know nothing about rabbits. Rabbits scare me for some reason. But look, you might go to something like that. Then if you're saying you're going to transition to a bigger animal, okay, well now you're into sheep and goats, and there's variations inside of there. But that's another one. There's a little more skill involved, a lot more land involved. Although yet you can have a small piece of land and still operate a goat or 2 or a sheep or 2. But then what I would do is I wouldn't start out trying to be a breeder. You're not going to get females and a buck or females and a ram. You're going to go and buy a feeder animal. In other words, a lamb that you're going to have slaughtered or whatever the case is. You're going to go in the freezer. You go and you get a couple of them, 1 or 2. Or just start out with just 1. And see if you can raise him up to slaughter weight and then have someone come out and then they process him out, whatever the case is. And if you don't have any problem with the killing of the animal, or if your dog doesn't kill it, or your neighbor's dog don't kill it, or it doesn't get out at 4 o'clock in the morning on a rainy Sunday night when you got the flu, or this kind of stuff. The fence, the area where you had placed was big enough, and you were able to, if you were able to manage an animal that is bound for your freezer, and you get him there, well, okay, you've done pretty good. That's okay. Now you might double your size next time. Let's get 2 lambs, or let's say add a goat, or get a dairy goat, or whatever the case is. But if you start small with the chickens, you understand the watering and the feed situation and the housing, and then you slowly work yourself into something bigger. And then it's in the same. What advantage I have is even if when I go to work, I'm within 4 or 5 miles of the place. Someone could call me up and say, hey, your cows are out. Well, okay, it's not like I'm 40 miles away. Okay, or I can travel during the week and then come back home. If you've got walk-around animals on your property, it's really tough. You got to have a good setup to be secure enough to know that you can leave town or be a great distance away, unless you have someone here that's with them. You may have another family member that's around while you're off doing the other thing, and that that kind of deal. So that's an issue with it too. But just think of the size. Start out with the little ones and work yourself up to the big ones. And there's plenty of information on YouTube. And really, with cattle, I would never spend big money when you're first getting in, because you want the opportunity is you may end up killing all of them. Don't go out and buy a $2,500 heifer or a $2,500 goat, or you get the $30, $40 animals, and see if you can. if you operate with them. You get some big expensive animal the first time out, you make a mistake and you kill that thing, you're done. I mean, you want to go through that. So you got to kind of start with I don't want to call them disposable, but you want to get the ones that are low impact on your checkbook. So you don't do, what I'm trying to say too is in livestock, you're gonna make a ton of mistakes and you're gonna have some tragic events, okay? But that is where all the learning comes in. If I've had people say, man, you're so good with this or these, they don't know how many of these I killed, not knowing what I was doing at the time or whatever the case is, or how many times I got lucky or whatever. And so that's when someone says, gee, how did you learn that? Well, because I didn't do it that way before. And they died or this or that or whatever the case is. Experience is huge, and really in livestock, you either borrow someone else's experience, which is not always available and not always correct, or you just put your time in and you gain your experience. Most people, when they first get into livestock, they don't stick with it. They, one season, maybe a couple of months, something bad happens or whatever, or it's not what they thought it was. It's a whiny animal crapping all over the place, and it's not this pastoral thing that they imagined. And so they get out. Well, I got in, I never got out. It's been over 10 years, almost a dozen years or whatever. But I picked up a lot of experience through that, and that's value. That's like that's a college degree right there. So if you don't want the mistakes to, you're going to make mistakes, but those mistakes are blessings, because that's what you learn. Unless you just ignore it and you keep making the same mistake, then you're an idiot. But I'll go back to the thing I said before. If you start out with chickens and you make some mistakes, well, even if you bought a full-grown chicken, you could buy a full-grown chicken out here, maybe $25, $35, which may seem expensive. But when you take those little chicks and you feed them to 5 months to where they'll start laying eggs, you're into them for way more than $25 or $35. So sometimes when you start out with that in chickens, if you could afford adults, get the adults. But anyhow, if you get a chicken, let's say you paid $50 for it. Well, let's say it died. Well, okay, you only have $50. If you had a $1,000 animal and something happened, that's a little harder to take. So if you're thinking about getting into something, get into chickens. Start small, work your way up. Plenty of information on YouTube. Don't worry about making mistakes as long as you learn from them. And I wouldn't start out with anything big or expensive. If you survive chickens, then go into a freezer lamb, they call them. You go out to the auction, you buy a small lamb. Maybe you might have to bottle feed it or whatever. Which bottle feeding is a little risky, but you learn how to do that. Sometimes you have calves and the mother dies. Well, guess what? You're bottle feeding. You should know how to do that. And there's great information online about that. But if you start out with that lamb, you take it to freezer weight, they slaughter it, put it in the freezer. If you can pull that off, hey, you're looking good. That's if you could keep a lamb alive like that, and you didn't make any mistakes there, you're 90% in. You're a rancher now. Just increase your numbers. But don't ever get too big either, because the more you have, the more you got to feed, the more all this stuff. So hopefully this made some sense. Start with chickens, work your way up, and if you have people around you that have livestock experience, that's good. That's they have a way that they do it, and if they've done it for any length of time, they've had some success. Because if it wasn't so successful, or if they did it wrong for too long, they'd get out. So if you have anyone that's done it for any length of time, they're having some success there, and they're worth listening to. So hopefully that was a benefit for you. Anyhow, good luck. But get into it. It's good.